So let's carry on here. I want to go back to this piece once more, and then let's copy out this circular element, copy out, snap back, and then separate it. Let's put the quick origin on it, and then with this selection, let's only select this with the reference image for now and take it into isolation mode. And that way it's easier for us here to work on this main shape for the next Boolean operator. So let's dissolve the center vertex and then let's connect it from top to bottom and then scale it up like that here. And now with this edge, let's give it a slight bevel so that we can then take it over here all the way to the right side. Now let's add another subdivision in the center and then we can bevel that. And what we can do next is extrude it out here to the bottom, snap back and drag it down. So now let's extrude that. And now we can get out of the isolation mode. Let's take these here into isolation. Let's look at it here from the bottom. But before we do the Boolean, I actually want to clean that up a bit here with these edges that we don't really need to have there. So let's dissolve them. So that way we produce less stuff that we have to clean up. So now in the bottom view, let's drag it all the way over here so that it goes through this edge there, a slight bit. So once we have that, what I want to do before we apply the Boolean is go back to this object here. Let's go in edit mode and then let's add a subdivision. Now we just got to align that SY0 and then let's drag it so that it's sort of like framing this element. Gonna make a bevel out of it, and then the other loop we can drag it over here to the left side. So that way we can make better or easier connections. And then let's apply that. Now let's take a look at it. We can now use our snapping tool here to connect already some of these vertex points where we can simply merge it. So this one here, let's drag that up. And then we can already do our connections as well. And then we just have to do the same thing on the other side. Here is a good use case for collapsing it like that and then simply dragging it over here. Saves us a bit of time. And now we just want to also think of that side here. Pretty much do the same thing that we did on the other side. So let's carry on here connecting this. And then whenever we're through, we're gonna make a target weld on everything. So right now we don't have to worry about any overlapping vertex points. We can always do that later. So same thing down here. I'm gonna collapse it and then snap it here to that corner. So let's zoom in a bit here to that part where we also have to make some connections here at that bottom side of it. And this one here also, let's connect that. And here's another case where I'm gonna do this inset followed by collapse. And the same thing here on that side. So there we have it. Let's get out of the isolation mode. And now we have to create that piece that belongs into that empty space where we just made the Boolean operation. For that, we're gonna make use of these faces here on the right side that already come with this little bevel, which we don't have on the left side. Let's separate it out. And then I want to get out of the snapping to make it a bit easier. Let's simply use the mirror modifier to get that over to the other side. We can then collapse it, and then we can simply delete the geometry on the right side. So now with that, let's position it so that it actually fits in here. I'm gonna leave a little bit of an empty space there to the sides. just a slight amount. And now let's make a subdivision here on that surface. Let's drag it over here. And then what I want to do is go over here to the back. And let's also add a subdivision. And let's see if it fits. It doesn't quite fit. So let's go to the edge slide and let's align it with this other edge that we have in the front here. So that way we have this here aligned. Let's drag out another face there at the back and let's then simply bring it up here on a straight axis here on Z. Now we can connect it there at the top, and now let's simply fill it here on the sides, and then all we have left to do is connect it like that here. And now with these faces we can extrude it out here to the side. So let's just make sure it doesn't intersect there. And then let's make a simple subdivision. Let's delete it on the left side, and then we put the quick origin here in the center, and then we can make use of our mirror modifier on the Z axis here. So I'm going to collapse that, and that way we already have this piece in place. And next we can work on that screw that's going through there. I'm going to have a radius of 3 mm, depth of 50. We can still adjust that later. And then let's rotate it around 90 degrees and position it so that it's in the center here of this element. So here on that side it looks like that. And then we have another simple case here of doing a Boolean operation on that. It will go through there a little bit here like that. This is how it's supposed to look like. Then we can apply that. So now, as always, we have to make sure that we're gonna connect this here. And I just wanna add an extra edge here with a knife cut so that we can connect this upper vertex here like that. And that way it doesn't have to stretch out so far here to the sides. So the other ones we can connect over here, and then with our vertex snapping, let's simply connect these points here, which are very close by each other already. And it really doesn't change much of the overall shape here from that cylinder. So then we just continue, and then here at the bottom, let's connect it here like that. And then let's save some time by doing an inset. And then again we snap it. So the same thing here. At least with that we can save a bit of time for this tedious work that we always have to do. So now let's also look at it here from the inside. And let's make some snapping here. Of course the question is, how much do we really see of that from the inside? But we still have to add it in order to ensure that it looks right on the sides. So there's no way by getting away with simply making some floating geometry for that and sort of like fake that as a normal map. We want to really have these screws built into that mesh. So whether we see much of it or not, in order to have the most realistic look, we just have to create it that way, so that from the outside we also have these different elements which are unique. So now we have this connected here also at the inside, and then we just have this piece here still left. So I'm gonna take this, and then we can do the inset after we connected the upper points here. Collapse and then snap it here to the upper side. And the same thing here on that one. So let's have another look around. And these edges here going through that center, I want to dissolve that. And then we can snap this vertex point here over to the left side, as well as dissolving these here. So that way we also saved a little bit of poly count there. And now let's select everything and let's merge by distance. And I just want to check with a smaller threshold, but it's the same result. 22 vertices in my case. We just want to make sure we don't have too big of a threshold, or else sometimes it will weld things that we don't want to weld. So now what we can do is reuse one of these screws and adjust it a little bit. For that, I'm gonna get rid of the modifiers on it. And there is still a bit of optimization that I want to do on these screws now that I look at it here. And that means that all these extra edges that we have there, we just want to snap them over here like that. Or else it's just too much of a poly count that's not really justified having there, because it doesn't really change anything of our silhouette on that screw. So if you remember, we made that screw originally from this Bolt Factory plugin that already comes with Blender. And since this is like a procedural tool that creates these screws for us, it's not necessarily, you know, something that was created for games specifically. So what we have to do then is to just clean it up manually. This is often a little bit the disadvantage of these procedural tools, but it still saves us time. And now let's just weld everything. And now that we have this optimized, not only do we save polys here and it looks better, we can also now get out of the snapping. And then let's make a copy of it. And then on that copy, let's simply get rid of the symmetry modifier. Let's put the quick origin to the center of this copied part, and then we can rotate it over here, as well as moving it into place. So that way we have this here already centered, but now let's change the shape of that screw. For that, we're gonna select it from the back and then grow the selection all the way to here. And let's simply get rid of everything pretty much. Because next we can extrude out this whole loop here and then snap it back and scale it up like that. So I'm just gonna push it back a little bit like that and then extrude out another segment. And then let's fill that. Let's switch over to our face mode, do an inset followed by another extrude. So now we just have to push that back in here. If it doesn't fit, you can give it a slight scale. So in my case it fits, so I'm just gonna take these faces here that we already have as a selection and drag it over here to the other side. So now we already did quite a lot of work on it. There's just a few more things to do, such as, for example, adding one of these floating details here on this element, where we have this piece there sticking into the geometry. So for that, we can reuse this face here. Let's just copy it, snap back, and then separate it out as a selection. Now let's give it a quick origin, and then let's simply drag it here to the front. That way it's also perfectly centered where it actually should be, to have such an extra detail there. One thing I want to do is take that a bit up here, these edges there. That's what I'm seeing here on the reference image. And that way this floating detail that we're about to create will also fit better once we bake it later. So now let's simply give it an inset. And then let's do another one and let's drag it over here to that side. As you can see, it already works with our bevel and subdivision modifiers on top of it, because we still had that on the screw. So we don't even have to add those modifiers to it. And that way we have this nice detail there in place. Let's just isolate this so that we can connect it over here. And then let's isolate also this piece where currently we have it still opened here. So what we have to do is select all these outer edges and then fill it. And then let's connect it like this here. Also what we can do is connect it like that and then simply dissolve this edge here. I forgot to target weld something at the front, but I will get back to that later. And meanwhile we can dissolve these edges here at the center. Since we're gonna unwrap everything uniquely, we won't be needing this. So now what we still have to do is work on this little dot there. And there's really not much to it. What we're gonna do is create a cube, and let's make that something like 5 millimeter in size, so rather small. And then let's select this face here, reverse the selection and delete everything else. Let's put a quick origin on that. And then let's position that here close to where we have this glass. And we want to make sure it's not intersecting, but have it slightly before it. So later we're just going to work with an alpha texture for this red dot, and that's all we need. Now I'm just going to make loop selections here on these parts. Only the first 4 of it each. And then let's give it a bevel here with 1 segment each to make it a bit more high poly. So I'm thinking this is actually it here for the reflex scope for now. Maybe there's still a few things that we see later, but overall this is pretty much done. And now let's add a new reference image. We just have to position it so that it fits our shape here. So let's drag that down, and as you can see, we're gonna be working on a flashlight now. So let's get to work here. We're gonna start with a cube. Let's put it to 59 millimeter as our reference image says. So that way we already determined the width of it. And then we can go in here again to this transform property window. And let's put X to 28 and Z to 25. So that way we already established the proportions here roughly. And that makes it easier then to build within this space. So let's just go back here to our folder hierarchy. And let's hide the revolver, and then let's create a new collection that we're gonna call flashlight. So then we can move this cube into the flashlight folder, and we still have this object here, which was this plane for our red dot. Let's right click that and let's add that back into our scope folder so that we can then hide it. And that means we now have everything clear here to work on the flashlight. I'm gonna make a copy of the reference image and let's rotate it 90 degrees. And I'm gonna put the location to X0 so that we already have it somewhat centered here. And now let's position it so that it fits here into this view where we see it from the front. So this fits perfectly here within this box dimension. And now we can continue with a cylinder. So I'm gonna put the radius to 7. And the depth we can still change later, but let's have it around 50. I'm gonna increase the edge count to 36 and then let's rotate it. So now let's position it so that the sides are touching on the left and at the bottom. Even if that doesn't look like it on the reference, we want to fit it into the frame of this box. I'm gonna push it over here in the side view so that this fits. And then let's make a copy of it. Let's snap that back. So now we have 2 cylinders, but for this selection that we currently have active, we're gonna connect it like this here. Then select this loop and let's make a slight bevel on that. And then we can select everything here on the right side and drag it over like this and then delete the vertex points like that here. So now let's press Ctrl A and we're gonna apply all transforms, which puts our pivot point back to 0 here. And now we can select these vertex points and also put it to 0 for the x coordinates. And that means that if we put the mirror modifier on, we have it perfectly symmetrical here to both sides. Now let's select that other cylinder that we have, and then let's drag it out a bit here. So that way we can then work on this shape that we have there, this button. That's where the battery goes in. So let's just put these vertex points closer here to it. And then in our front view, let's make an inset here and drag that out as well. Now we want to work on this cross that we see there. Well, it's not exactly a cross, but it's this interesting shape. And for that, we want to make sure that we do the right count here with the vertex points where we connect that. It looks a bit like a star now here at the inside. And then what we can do with that is make an extrusion. But before we do that, let's add a subdivision. And let's pull that a little bit to the front here. So now let's select these faces here, or these vertex points, and I want to drag it further out here like that. Let's switch to face mode, and then with that selection we're gonna make an extrude to the inside. Now let's align it S, Y and 0. And what we can do next is selecting these vertex points that we have here at the corners. Let's press Shift so that we select all of them. And then we're gonna make a Ctrl B followed by V to make a vertex bevel. And I'm gonna increase the segments. I'm gonna have it at 3. And now we can adjust the shape here in these parameters and basically make it inverted so that these are sort of like going in and not out. So that way we already have pretty much this shape here in place. And then we can simply delete the right side. And now we just want to clean that up here before we mirror it back. So that way we save us some time. We don't have to do it on both sides. Technically we could even only work on a quarter of it, but you know, sometimes we don't want to overcomplicate it. So let's just have a half of it, as we make sure that these vertex points here are properly connected. So same thing here. Gonna select 2 vertex points at a time and then connect it over. And then only here is what's left, as well as here on that side. So now let's connect these ones here as well. And down here, and then we can dissolve these edges here once we did a mirror modifier on it. So let's put that back on. And I'm gonna apply it. We're gonna connect the remaining vertex points here. And somehow I made a mistake here. It was the wrong vertex. Now we got that, and we can then select the remaining vertex points, and let's just simply delete it and fill it back up. Now we can make an inset and collapse it here like this. And then let's just also connect these points here. So that way we rule out any triangulation issues there. Same here. And then only 2 left. And then we basically have this detail already done. I'm quite liking this detail because it's a bit of a unique shape. And it's gonna add an interesting detail here to this flashlight. So now let's go over here, and we want to select the sharp edges, and we can then further add to this selection here with Shift and Alt. So let's select everything here, And then also here on that edge loop, let's take that into account. And then we want to add our bevel weight to that. Let's put that to 1. And now let's apply our bevel modifier. We just have to put the threshold down. Let's look at it here with 0.1. And then let's add a subdivision surface to it. And also I want to put it to weight here on the bevel, so that it reads the edges that we were just giving the bevel weight to. And let's increase the resolution on the subdivision. And I'm seeing a little bit of an overlap there where we have it here at the bottom. So let's select these edges and let's increase our bevel weight here to 1 so that we don't have that anymore. So that's how we made a high poly out of it. Let's take another look at it. And I would like to add this little detail here where we have these intersections here. So I'm gonna drag it out a bit, add another loop here with a subdivision, and then let's give that 2 segments of our bevel. And then we can select the center one and scale it down like that here. And with these edges selected, let's put our bevel weight back on there. And this is how we have this detail now added to it. I'm gonna put the threshold to 0.15 to make that a bit more soft and round. That way it's not so hard-edged looking. So now let's work on the next thing. Let's add a cylinder. And I'm gonna put the radius to 2 millimeters and let's have the depth at 1 and let's rotate it around. So it's gonna be one of these floating details, and in that case, don't worry, I wanna keep it. So it's not like these other screws on the revolver. This one I actually wanna keep here, so let's definitely work on that. I'm just mentioning that so you don't get confused, because some of the screws we're gonna do in Substance Painter, but this one here, let's add that. So I was just giving it an inset, and now on the inner part of it, we do this cross shape. Let's select these faces, and then let's do an inset once more on that, followed by an extrude. So now we can scale that down. And I want to add another subdivision here around these sides, followed by another one. And we can then drag it like this here. So that way we pretty much already have this detail. Let's see what that looks like here with our bevel modifier on it. I'm gonna put that down to 0.1, add a subdivision surface. And in that case, we don't even need to add bevel weights because it's purely based on our angles, which are sharp enough so that we don't have to work with any bevel weights. So I'm just gonna drag that a little bit further out here, give it a slight rotation to make it a bit more interesting. Let's add all transforms so that we get our pivot back to the center, and then we can simply mirror it over to the other side. So now let's make a copy here of this element, snap it back, and then let's also put all transforms on it so that our pivot is in the center. So now instead of the mirror modifier, we do the X global mirror action, which will then only mirror it once here for that piece that we just copied. Now we can make the quick origin of it here into the center, and then we want to fill it at the back, as well as deleting all the modifiers that are on it. Let's invert the selection and delete everything aside from this face. And now let's make an extrude on it. So that way we have our cylinder back here. I'm just gonna put the quick origin back into the center. Let's drag it out like this here. And now let's scale it down a bit. So that way we have this perfectly in place here. And what we can do now is delete this box because it mostly fulfilled its purpose. We already have everything in place here where it matters. And now let's make a subdivision here through these edges, connect it over here to this side, and then let's delete the whole upper part. So let's also delete these faces here at the back. We don't really need them at the moment, but we want to keep everything here and extrude it up. So I'm gonna snap that back and then let's align that here to our reference, and I'm gonna apply the mirror modifier. Let's just delete the left side. Since it's symmetrical, we can focus only on this one here for the moment. And now let's take these points and we want to drag it to this point here and then extrude a portion out, and we want to extrude it here to this point on the left side, and then another portion all the way up to where we see it ending on the reference image. So now I'm going to use the knife tool, make a straight line up here based on that angle sort of roughly, and then let's delete these two faces to already get a bit of the basic shape here into place. So let's extrude this out here, snap back, and then bring to the highest point where we see it on the reference image, followed by another one that we take to X0. So now we can take this edge here. I'm gonna go here into the front view, and let's be quite generous here with our bevel. Let's make sure this is nice and round. I'm gonna give it 7 segments. Now let's add a subdivision here and let's increase it to 3. But then we can delete the upper 2, or dissolve I should say. We only want this one here so that we get this little step here. I'm gonna align it. Not that it really makes a big difference, but that way we know it's perfectly aligned. And now let's make some connections here. I'm gonna select all these edges that we have here, and then let's press F to fill it. And now we simply have to connect these points here. So that way we already have this shape here. Now let's select these edges together with everything on top and all the way over here, and let's make another extrusion. And then with that active selection, let's align it S, X, and 0. And then we can put that here to 0 on the X coordinates for our transform. So here's something that I noticed when I look at this reference image. It doesn't quite seem to fit when we put our revolver back on. You can see that this space here is way more, well, not necessarily way more, but is quite a bit more than we see on the reference. And that leads me to think that I got some numbers wrong on the dimensions. So what we can do now is select everything here and simply drag it a bit to the left side. And the only disadvantage is that we also have to scale these parts a bit down. So let's take another look. We want to make sure that this part here is still within this shape here on the left side. So let's just make sure that this is a given. And then I'm going to put the quick origin back. Let's drag this here to the front again. So these edges, we want to have one continuous flow. And now on this one here, I'm gonna drag it over a bit here to the left side. So this is just something that now looks better as if it would fit here if we look at that again, as to before where it was just sticking out way too much. Now let's also continue here with this. Let's add this subdivision here and let's drag it here a bit to the right. I'm gonna have another subdivision horizontally and increase it to 2 cuts. And that way we already have a few more extra edges here to work with. Let's take this edge here, or these loops, and let's drag it a little bit further down. And then these points we want to drag here in our vertex mode over to the left. And we can give them a bevel. So let's give that 4 segments. And then let's already think about our connections. Let's connect this, and then let's simply delete these faces here. So now you might think, well, it's sort of like floating in the air if we look at that, but it doesn't matter. We're gonna just simply drag it down a little bit later, and then it will fit. So now let's just make some connections here. Let's fill that and connect our vertex points. And on that edge, I want to give it a bevel. Let's just make it with 1 segment. So that way it doesn't look so pointy there. And then let's re-enable the revolver. And you can see later we can do this here. Simply drag it down. This is just for demonstration purpose. I'm going to put it back up so that it fits with our reference image. Now let's add a subdivision here. Now let's select all these vertex points and let's drag them down like that so that we have a bit of a curve there. Let's do a bit of vertex point snapping here so that this is not so dense there. I'm gonna also select every second edge here and then press M and collapse it so that we don't have such an insane edge count there where it doesn't really make much of a difference as long as we have the main curve. So let's add a subdivision and align it in preparation for this dent that we see there on the right side of it. I'm gonna add a UV sphere this time, not a cylinder but a sphere. Gonna put that down to 24 segments and a radius of 8 millimeter. Now let's position it roughly here where we see it on our reference, and let's rotate it around 90 degrees like this. So now let's position it pretty much here in the center of this button that we see there at the reference. Now let's drag it over here to this side. You can see it on my transformation tab, the way that I scale it here. I want that to be 0.6 to be exactly on our X scale. And now let's use the JMesh plugin. I'm gonna apply the mirror modifier. Let's merge everything by distance. And then we wanna make that a Boolean operator here, this sphere that we just created. So I'm gonna bring it a little bit closer. And then let's apply difference to it. So let me put back on this item tab so that you can see my coordinates where I put that. But most importantly, this black outline that we see now should match our reference image. So I'm gonna scale it up a slight bit. Gonna leave a little bit of space there at the bottom. And it looks like we have a little bit of a mess here on the right side, but this is okay. Let's apply that, and then we simply have to do a little bit of cleanup. It might not look exactly like this on your end now because, you know, it's a very specific Boolean operation on a complicated intersection. But let's just collapse these points here so that we have less of a mess. So I'm sorry if this might be a little bit difficult to get one-to-one the same result, but as long as you do a little bit of cleanup then, this should be perfectly fine. So in that case here, we can also connect it over just to overall clean it up. Collapse some of these points and then make some connections also. So the same thing here on that side. And also here at the upper right part. Now this edge, let's dissolve it. And let's also dissolve this one. And then simply we connect it also here at the top. And that takes care of this detail that we have here now. I'm gonna get out of the snapping mode. Also forgot that part here. Let's connect that. And then we can merge by distance. There were still a few vertex points that needed some target welding. Let's focus on the back part of it. Let's align these edges. And then let's fill this here. Switch over to our cut tool, and from this vertex point on here, let's cut down and let's press C to make an angle constraint so that we have this region which we can then copy and separate out. Let's put the quick origin on it and let's drag it to the side, and now we can dissolve this edge here. We only needed that to get this element out of it. So what we're gonna do with this element is creating these plastic looking things, but we're gonna do that in a moment. First, let's extrude out this region and let's give it a bevel. This part is sort of like plastic, and the same goes for this here. This is also some hard plastic. And now let's position that like this here. And then in our face mode, let's extrude it out all the way here, as well as pushing that up a bit. And then let's just dissolve this edge there at the bottom. Let me just drag this reference image out of the way so that it's not really hiding what we're doing here. And then let's select this face here. I'm just gonna snap into this view and let's hide the revolver so that we see it better. And then I'm gonna give it a bevel with 2 segments. And with these vertex points here that are almost by each other, let's simply collapse them. Same thing here at the bottom. And now let's go back here into this view and let's add a subdivision here through the center of it. And then with that selection, let's scale it here on our Z-axis and also bring it down on that axis. We can dissolve this edge loop here, it doesn't really do much for us. And now let's give this here another bevel. Also with 2 segments, and then if we want, we can still align these individual loops here. But more importantly, I want to take this face here. But more importantly, I want to bevel this here as well. Let's undo it and let's give this 3 segments to make this really round. And then from the back side here, let's also collapse these vertex points on that. So that pretty much gives us this shape, and all that's left to do is adding the vertex point connections here. Let's also do that here on that side. This edge loop here, let's dissolve it. Doesn't really do much other than costing us. So let's just finish connecting these points here. And then what we can do is unhide our revolver once more, because there's an element that we can just simply reuse, which is this one. So let's make a copy of that, and then I simply want to move it into the flashlight collection so that we can then hide the revolver again. And now let's rotate it around here 180 degrees, and let's position that according to our reference image at the back side of this part here. So let's make sure it doesn't intersect, but it's as close to this part as possible. And now I'm gonna apply all transforms so that we have the pivot at the center, and that enables us to put a mirror on it. So now we have this detail twice, and the same I want to do it here on that piece. Let's also put that pivot to 0 and let's add a mirror modifier. So now let's get back to this piece here, and what we can do is hide the mirror once more and then switch over to our edge mode, and let's select these outer edges here all the way through. And with that selection, we can then increase our bevel weight. So once again, let's work with the bevel weight here for this piece. I'm gonna then add the bevel modifier. We want to put that to weight. And then let's just check that it works and everything seems to be fine. So let's add our subdivision surface on top of that. And let's increase the resolution here to 3. So that way we have this nice and high poly. We can then put the mirror back on. And now let's focus on this piece here again. So first of all, let's also have a vertex connection here. And then let's connect that up here into the center. And also on the front, we already have it. So that means we can get rid of it here on the right side for now. And let's put the quick origin here at the upper center, and let's put the mirror back on. It always makes sense to keep the mirror modifier on for as long as possible, especially on objects where we have this perfect symmetry on it. And in case of this flashlight, it's mostly the case. So we're gonna be working here with the mirror modifier on for as long as possible, while we are adding the details that are the same on both sides. And this is also what we're gonna do next. Let's dissolve these edges here at the front, and then let's get out of this isolation view. So now we can focus on some of the smaller details, like these step-looking splits there in the reference. For that, let's add some subdivisions here. And let's already get that into place to have some edges there, so that later we can separate that out. And then later we will work with the remeasure modifier to make this a nice high poly. This one here, I want to give it a bevel because this is a bit thicker looking there. And now that we have that, let's go back here to the front view. And I want to actually position that more like this here. Before, that angle was a little bit off, and this suits it better. Now let's work on this other detail here. And for that, we're gonna add a cylinder. And I'm gonna stick with 24 sides, put a radius of 2 millimeter, and then let's have a depth of 1 millimeter. Let's rotate that here 90 degrees on our y-axis, and that way we can already sort of like define this cutout shape there in the background. Let's just scale it up a bit. So let's have this like that, and then let's connect this here in the center, and let's drag it over here. So now let's also give it a connection here through this segment. And now let's make a copy of what we have so far, because we're gonna be reusing it. So let's just copy that over to the side. And then let's carry on here with this shape. I'm gonna delete everything here at the bottom so that we have half a circle. Let's extrude out this region here. And then we're gonna select this face and extrude it out like that here. And we can also get rid of the left side. So let's delete everything aside from the front faces. And I made an interesting discovery here. If we press X and say limited dissolve, then we get to keep our inner faces. as opposed to before where we had to fill it back up on some elements. So we can make use of that. And then let's bevel this here and let's put the quick origin back into the center, and we're gonna add our mirror modifier. So let's put that to Y and let's confirm it. And then let's select the faces and extrude it out like this here. So now let's put an inset on that and let's push that in a bit. Now we can grow that selection, make an invert selection, and let's delete these faces at the back so that we're left here with this detail. Let's make a connection on it, and then let's add a bevel modifier to it. So currently we don't see anything. Let's put our threshold to 0.1, and also we want to uncheck clamp overlap. That way we actually start seeing something here. Let's add some more segments to it. And let's also connect these vertex points here. So then let's see what it looks like with a subdivision surface. To make it high poly, gonna put the resolution to 3, and then we're gonna position it here close to that surface, because this is going to be another one of these floating details. I'm gonna copy this here out, these faces only. Let's separate it out, and then with that selection, let's extrude it out like this here. So this part we're actually gonna use as 3D model as opposed to the other detail, which is just a floating detail. But this element here we're gonna be using, and let's adjust the offset a bit. I'm gonna put that to 0.1, and this part here is gonna be that screw, and this will also be an actual 3D detail. So let's make a preparation for that here. Let's connect these vertex points, and then similar to what we were doing on the reflex scope, let's extrude that out here. And now I want to give this a bevel like this with one segment only, as according to our reference image. Now let's see what it looks like here with our bevel applied to it. We can also make use here through the JMesh plugin in order to get that. Always multiple ways to do something. This is always worth noting. So don't get confused if sometimes I use the modifier stack, then sometimes I use JMesh. Ultimately, it also just adds a bevel to it. So after adjusting that a bit here, this is starting to look really good for our high poly. And then we can make an inset on it and extrude it out like this here. So let's push that into the object here. This is gonna be intersecting, but because we have this floating detail there, it kind of masquerades it. So let me put this vertex point to x0. And then we can delete the face that we have here on that side, both of them. Let's put our quick origin there into that center, and then let's also apply our mirror modifier. Let's put that to Z. And let's just give it a bit of a tilt here to make that more interesting looking. So now let's select this piece here once more, and we're gonna press Ctrl A, put the all transforms on to put the pivot back to 0, and that way we can mirror it over here as an element. We want to do the same thing here for this detail, our floating detail. Also put that over, and that way it looks like there is some depth, even though we actually in that case didn't extrude into the geometry, because it would have just been a bit too much. And it looks just as fine without it and just with this floating normal map detail. So I'm gonna add a cylinder with 24 sides, and let's put the radius to 1. So this is going to be one of these small screws that we have to add at the front of our flashlight. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees on X, and then let's drag that over here. You can see in the background we have this little screw which is tucked in there. So what we have to do is first of all scale it up again a bit. It was a bit too small. And now, very important, we want to make a copy of this. So we leave this copy exactly in the same place, but for now let's just hide it. And then we go back to this element and we're gonna make a connection here in the center so that we can use this part as a Boolean operator to cut this hole in there, and then we have the other one as a copy in the same place for our screw. So let's go to the bottom view and let's drag that a bit in. So now we just want to go back here to this element where currently we still have the mirror modifier on it. So let's apply that, and this is the point where from now on this is going to be a unique element. We made all our connections and now it's time to make some details on it that require it to be unique. So let's put that difference on there. And since it looks good, we want to apply that. And we can also delete this shape here. And now we can put that screw detail back on. Let's just scale it slightly down, but other than that, it's perfectly in position. And with the front vertex points, let's also drag it out a bit, or actually I mean in. And then on that front face, once we switch to the face mode, we're gonna do an inset on that. So let's put that around here. And now I'm gonna select every second edge and grow it with Shift, Control and the plus button on the numpad. And let's collapse it. And let's do that once more. Let's collapse that, and that leaves us here with these 6 sides. Let's scale it up a bit, and then we can extrude to the inside and give it a scale. So that's gonna be our screw here for that part. And let's apply our bevel modifier on it to also already make that a high poly so we don't have to do it later. So later we only have to toggle it on or off is what I mean. So let's add the subdivision and let's increase the resolution. And maybe we want to make it a bit bigger on that offset so that it's more soft.